I stood there, frozen, holding a tray of champagne flutes meant for the toast I helped plan. 40 years of marriage. That's what they were all here for. A garden party under the string lights I had personally strung, with music I had chosen, food I had prepped in advance, and enough seat cushions fluffed to make even Martha Stewart nod in approval. But somehow, no one looked at me like I belonged. It was my husband's voice that called me over. Not with affection, not with joy, with impatience. "Could you bring out the second tray, Ruth?" he called from the gazebo. Not honey, not darling, not even please. Just Ruth, like a hired hand. I swallowed hard and walked across the lawn in the heels my daughter said were too nice for someone who'd just be serving. That should have been the first warning, but it wasn't. The real slap came moments later. I just handed out the last glass when I turned to see my daughter-in-law, Bree, standing beside my husband with a dazzling smile and a glass raised high. She wore pearls I'd given her on her wedding day. She looked every bit the hostess, even though she'd done nothing to plan this party. "To Walter and Ruth," she announced. 40 years of love and partnership, and of course, 40 years of Ruth's tireless domestic dedication. We honestly don't know what we'd do without our favorite family maid. The crowd erupted in polite laughter. Maid. The word didn't just sting. It rewrote me in real time. I wasn't the woman who raised 2 kids while working nights. I wasn't the one who kept this family together through layoffs, cancer scares, and miscarriages. I wasn't the glue. I was a maid. I didn't say a word. My smile didn't crack. Not yet. I stood there, glass still in my hand, as the camera flashes popped. My own son clinked glasses with Bree and whispered, "You're savage," like it was a compliment. Walter laughed. I turned to walk inside, but someone handed me another empty tray like I was invisible. Like I hadn't just been publicly stripped of every ounce of dignity. The rest of the night blurred. Guests raved about the food, the lighting, the playlist. All things I had orchestrated. Bree told them she pulled it together last minute. My name wasn't mentioned once. When I went back to the kitchen, I found Bree's heels on my baking counter. "Oops," she said when I moved them. "Didn't realize you needed space to clean or whatever." Clean or whatever. I stared at the oven, the one Walter promised to replace 6 years ago. The dented fridge. The tile I had scrubbed till my knees bled. And I realized something terrifying. They didn't forget I was Ruth. They erased who Ruth used to be. Back in the living room, Bree sat curled on my favorite armchair, legs tucked up, glass of red in hand, scrolling through photos of herself from the night. Walter leaned over her shoulder and chuckled. My son, Jeremy, sat beside them talking about listing their house soon. Bree sighed. If only we could just take over this place instead. So much more functional. He agreed. I was still standing in the doorway. Bree turned, saw me, and smiled sweetly. "Oh, Ruth, we were just saying how lucky we are to have you. Most families don't get to live with their built-in help." Walter didn't flinch. Jeremy didn't blink. I nodded once and turned toward the stairs. I didn't trust myself to speak. Not yet. In my bedroom, the one I hadn't redecorated since the kids were small, I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out the photo album tucked behind my nightstand, and flipped to the picture of our first house. The one I paid the down payment on. I traced the faded edges, remembering how excited Walter was that day. Back then, he called me his partner. Now, I was the punchline. I stared out the window at the garden below, where laughter still drifted up. My garden, the one I planted with love. Bree once told her friends the roses just came with the house. I closed the album gently. The only sound was the clock ticking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I made a decision. The next morning, I called Dolores. Because there's always a Dolores. She didn't answer with a hello. She answered with, "What did they do now?" I told her everything. The toast. The heels. The maid comment. Dolores didn't gasp. She just exhaled. "Then it's time," she said. "Time for what?" "Time you stop being their welcome mat and start being the door that shuts." I didn't respond. Not right away. But my eyes found the drawer beside the bed, the one that held our trust papers, the house deed, the folder marked, "In case of emergency." Dolores's voice crackled through the line. "I know a lawyer. Young guy. Fresh teeth. Sharp. And most importantly, he doesn't take family disrespect lightly." I opened the drawer, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like Ruth again. Not the maid, not the wife, not the help, just Ruth. And Ruth was about to remind them who built this house and who could just as easily dismantle it. Before we continue, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to more powerful stories like this one. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was upset, not even because I was hurt. It was something deeper, like my soul was pacing in circles, tired of being still. For years, I had tolerated their forgetfulness, their subtle jabs, their performative gratitude. But that toast, that single sentence dressed as a joke, that was the trigger. By sunrise, I'd made a list. Dolores always said, when your heart breaks, give it a task. So I did. Call lawyer, gather documents, clean the kitchen one last time, smile like nothing's wrong. I was rinsing dishes when Walter came in, yawning, still smelling of whiskey and party leftovers. He grabbed a mug and said, "Big success last night, huh?" I said nothing. He chuckled. "Bree really knows how to command a room. You should take notes." I dried my hands calmly. "Do you think I'm the maid?" I asked without looking at him. He blinked. "What? Do you think I'm the maid?" I repeated. "You laughed when she said it. I want to know if you agreed." He scratched his head. "Oh, come on, Ruth. It was just a joke. Don't be sensitive. You know Bree's sense of humor." I turned then, slowly. "No, Walter. I know yours." He shifted awkwardly, like the room suddenly got colder. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I heard you laugh when she made me invisible." He didn't answer, just sipped his coffee and walked out of the room. And in that moment, I knew he wasn't confused. He was comfortable. There's a difference. Later that morning, I dressed carefully. Navy cardigan, iron slacks, gold earrings Cliff had given me before he passed. A look that said stable and serious. I took a cab into town, not because I couldn't drive, but because I wanted time to think. Time to rehearse. Time to prepare for the version of myself I was about to become. Peter Langston's office was tucked in the corner of an old brick building just past the bakery. Dolores was already waiting there with 2 coffees and a yellow folder labeled "For Ruth only." Peter was younger than I expected, no older than my Jeremy, but with kind eyes and a desk that screamed precision. He stood when I entered, extended his hand firmly, and said, "Dolores told me you're ready." I sat down. My voice was even. "I'm not ready to cut ties," I said. "I'm ready to control where they lead." Peter smiled faintly and opened a notepad. "Let's start at the beginning." I told him everything. The house, fully paid off and in my name. The trust account Walter didn't know I'd converted to a private clause 3 years ago. The savings I'd quietly built after realizing retirement in this family was just another word for servitude. I handed him the folder of documents, receipts, original contracts. He raised his eyebrows at the organization. "I was married to a man who forgot everything but always expected dinner at 6, I said. "I learned to be precise." Peter laughed softly. "You've done half my job already." "No," I said. "I'm just reclaiming the one they think I abandoned." We spent 2 hours going through everything, rewriting my will, restructuring the house deed, locking the trust fund to require dual authorization. I added one clause, a mandatory character review for any potential inheritor. "What's the threshold?" Peter asked. I smiled. "Common decency." By the time I walked out of that office, the foundation had been laid. I wasn't demolishing anything, not yet, but I was tightening the screws. Back at home, Bree was lounging on the couch, FaceTiming someone about renovating this whole outdated space when it's ours. She didn't even mute herself when I walked by. I sat in the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and listened. "This place could be amazing with just a little vision," she said. Once Ruth's out of the way, we can really make it ours. The person on the other end asked something I couldn't hear. Bree laughed. Oh, I'm not worried. She doesn't even know what a digital deed is. She thinks paper files protect her. Trust me, it's basically mine already. I didn't flinch. I just walked upstairs. Because I knew something she didn't. I knew that within a week, she wouldn't be able to access a single account without my approval. I knew that Walter's lazy grin would vanish when he found out I'd quietly transferred 60% of our shared funds into a private retirement plan under my sole name. I knew that Jeremy, who once told me, "You wouldn't survive a month without Dad," was about to realize I'd spent 10 years surviving without any of them. That night, I didn't say a word. Just made dinner. Lasagna. Bree's favorite. She gushed over it, called it restaurant quality, then laughed and said, "Guess we'll have to learn the recipe when this place is ours." Walter chuckled. Jeremy clinked a glass. And I smiled, because I wasn't cooking for them anymore. I was feeding the last memory they'd have of me like this. In the quiet of my room, I opened my journal. Page 1, column headers. Who sees me? Who uses me? Under uses, I wrote, Walter. Bree. Jeremy. Under sees. I left it blank, because that's what this part was for, making space. I stared out the window at the stars, whispering to no one. They're about to find out what happens when the maid stops cleaning up after them. Tomorrow, I'd plant the first seed. Not out of vengeance, but because it was my garden, and I was done letting weeds run wild. The next morning, Bree was already stomping around the hallway in one of her trademark dramatic flurries. I could hear her from my bathroom as I dabbed concealer under my eyes. Another disguise, another performance. Who changed the Wi-Fi password? She snapped, voice slicing through the walls like broken glass. Jeremy, did you mess with it? My phone won't connect, and I need to post last night's photos. I was trending. I kept brushing my hair, slow and steady. By the time I walked into the kitchen, she was pacing with her phone held high like it owed her an explanation. Jeremy was half asleep, still scratching his stomach and sipping coffee like he wasn't about to lose everything. Walter sat at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper I paid for in the house I owned, with the electricity I managed to keep on when he forgot to pay the bills during his 6-month sabbatical. I set down a plate of scones, freshly baked, and said nothing. Ruth, Bree whined, we need to reset the Wi-Fi. I can't get online. I turned to her slowly. Oh, the internet's still on, I said with a light smile. I just changed the settings. Passwords, controls, it's all been updated. Why would you do that? Jeremy asked. I realized something, I said, turning to refill my tea. When people treat you like the maid, they don't think to ask who controls the keys. Bree narrowed her eyes. Is this about the toast? Ruth, that was a joke. So, was letting you think you could move into a house you don't own? I said, placing a slice of butter on my scone. But here we are. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I didn't wait. I'll email you the new password once you've earned it, I said, and then left the kitchen without looking back. In my room, I opened my laptop and reviewed the security settings. All systems updated. Cameras adjusted. Account alerts enabled. No one in that house could change a thing now without triggering a notification to my phone, one they didn't know existed, hidden in a fake book by my bed. I'd played the maid long enough. Now I was the gatekeeper. But it didn't stop there. Later that afternoon, Bree came stomping back up the stairs. This is insane, she said. Now, the Nest thermostat is locked. I shrugged. We're saving energy. We. Yes. The owners of the house. Jeremy finally spoke up. Okay, what's going on? I turned to him. What's going on is that your wife made a spectacle of me at my own anniversary party. And instead of defending me, you laughed. I thought it was harmless. No, Jeremy. Harmless is forgetting to say thank you. Harmless is getting my name wrong at Starbucks. What you did was humiliation with garnish. He looked down, but not out of shame, just avoidance. That boy never did know how to sit with discomfort. Are you mad because of the joke? Bree asked. I stepped forward, voice steady. I'm mad because you believe the joke was the only offense. She rolled her eyes. Look, if you're still bitter. Bitter? I repeated, smiling. Darling, I'm not bitter. I'm strategic. And while you were busy calling me the maid, I was rerouting the entire property under a clause you didn't even know existed. She blinked. You're lying. Ask Peter Langston. That got her attention. She turned pale. Who? Lawyer. Young. Fresh teeth. Excellent suits. I didn't explain more. I didn't need to. I left her standing there in the hallway, the painted smile melting off her face. Back downstairs, Walter was still on the couch, slippers on, remote in hand. I watched him scroll through channels like nothing had changed. Didn't you say you were meeting with the accountant this week? I asked casually. He shrugged. Yeah, next Thursday. Why? You might want to reschedule. I already met with him. He froze. You what? I had some questions about our joint accounts. Turns out most of our assets can be transferred under sole discretion if one party is proven to have sole property ownership of the residence. He stared. You wouldn't. I did. He stood up fast, his face red. This is my house, Ruth. I tilted my head. Really? Remind me, whose name is on the deed? He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. I had bought the house. With my money. After my grandmother passed and left me a modest inheritance. Walter had always said we'd update the paperwork. We never did. And now, that one day, paperwork had become my full leverage. He slumped back down on the couch, suddenly very quiet. That night, I called Dolores. Did you do it? She asked. Step 1 is complete, I said. They can't access the accounts, the house, or the thermostat. Dolores cackled so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Ruth, she said, you glorious woman. What's step 2? I paused, looking out the window. Silence, I said. I want to see how long it takes before they realize I'm not afraid of being alone, that I'm choosing it. She went quiet for a moment. Then, you're not just reclaiming the house, honey. You're reclaiming yourself. Exactly. The next morning, I made a single breakfast plate. Eggs, toast, tea. No extras. I sat alone on the porch, watched the sun rise, and listened to them scramble inside. They didn't know yet. Not fully. They hadn't realized the gravity of it all. But soon they would. Because when the maid takes the keys back, the whole house changes. And I wasn't done. Not even close. I once heard someone say the best revenge is no longer hiding your joy. But joy felt like a foreign language that morning. Not because I was unhappy. Because I was waiting. Waiting for them to catch up to the truth. Waiting for them to realize the house they stood in. The Wi-Fi they fought over. The fridge they raided daily. None of it was theirs. The only thing they owned now was the echo of their entitlement. And it was starting to ring. Bree didn't come down for breakfast. Jeremy left early, avoiding eye contact. Walter? He tried to be civil, tried to butter his toast and my ego at the same time. Coffee smells good, he said, sliding into the chair across from me like we hadn't just had a Cold War in the living room 24 hours earlier. I folded my napkin. It's Ethiopian roast. A gift from Dolores. She said I'd need something strong. He hesitated. Look, Ruth, maybe things got a little out of hand. Things, I repeated. He backtracked. Bree's joke. The party. The commentary. I set my teacup down carefully. Is that what you think this is about? One joke. He stayed quiet. Walter, this isn't about Bree's humor. It's about the pattern. The casual cruelty you've all treated me with for years, just dressed up in pearls and backyard centerpieces. He exhaled, leaning back. You're being dramatic. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. No, Walter. I was being silent. This is me finally being accurate. And with that, I stood, took my journal, and left him at the table with cold coffee and warm guilt. I spent the rest of the morning in the garden, pruning the roses they never noticed. I moved slowly, deliberately, feeling every petal like a page of my past self being rewritten. By noon, Bree was stomping again. I'd locked the office. She didn't know yet that I'd moved the filing cabinet. "Ruth," she snapped, banging on my bedroom door like a petulant child. "Where are the deed papers? Jeremy needs them for the refi application." "Refinance?" I didn't answer. I just sat on the edge of my bed, opened my journal, and made 2 new columns. Entitled to expect, earned to receive. Under entitled, I wrote,
Bree.
Jeremy, Walter. Under earned, I left it blank. Again. A knock came at the front door later that afternoon. I heard it from upstairs. Muffled conversation. I peeked out the window and saw Bree talking to a stranger, someone in a blazer with a clipboard. She was gesturing toward the driveway, then to the front of the house. I waited.
Watched.
And then I saw her hand him a business card. Real estate. Bree had scheduled an appraisal. She thought she could list my house. I didn't rage. I didn't march downstairs. I just called Peter. "They're trying to list it," I said simply. He didn't even pause. "Did you receive my updated security docs?" "They're filed and notarized." "Then let them try," he said. "They'll be tripping over laws they never cared to read." Bree barged into my room later, like she owned it. "You need to come downstairs and explain to this guy that we're prepping for a listing. I gave him your full name. He just needs your confirmation for now." I looked at her. Really looked. Perfectly sculpted hair, boutique earrings, white blazer with coffee stains from a morning tantrum. She looked like a woman who wanted to sell a life she hadn't built. "Bree," I said, "I'm not listing the house."
She scoffed.
"Don't be difficult." I stood slowly. Difficult is pretending someone's joke is harmless while watching them bleed under it. She rolled her eyes. "This again?" "Yes," I said calmly.
Again.
And again.
And again.
Until the locks change. Until the deed is updated. Until your name vanishes from any folder that used to house my forgiveness. She stepped back slightly. "Are you throwing us out?" I gave her a long, level stare. "I'm reclaiming space. If that feels like exile to you, perhaps ask yourself why." Bree didn't respond. She turned, flustered, and stormed out. The real estate agent was already backing down the front steps like he'd wandered into the wrong theater production. That evening, I took a walk, just down the road, past the trees that had shaded this house since my kids were toddlers. I walked until the sky turned lavender, until I could no longer hear the hum of the house behind me. And when I came back, there was a note on the door. From Jeremy. "Mom, we need to talk. Not about the house, not about Bree. Just about us. Please." I folded the note carefully and tucked it in my journal. Not to accept the apology, but to record the moment the first crack appeared in their facade. Because once they start asking instead of taking, the game changes. But I wasn't done watching yet. I wanted to see how deep the cracks would go. It had rained overnight. The garden glistened in the early light, droplets clinging to petals like tears that had already finished their cry. I sat on the porch wrapped in Cliff's old flannel, watching the sunrise melt into pinks and golds. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing, the kind that makes you believe in beginnings. I hadn't spoken to Jeremy since the note. He'd left it on the door like a child sliding an apology under their parents' door after breaking something important. But this wasn't about one broken thing. It was about erosion. Decades of quiet disrespect washing over the edges of love until there was no shape left. I had no interest in discussing us until he acknowledged me. So I let the silence hold.
Until the knock came.
Not from Jeremy. Not from Bree. Someone else. It was almost noon. I'd just finished moving the last of my personal documents into the locked cabinet in the guest room when I heard it. A knock. Rhythmic.
Come.
I opened the door slowly, unsure who might still knock without shouting first. There he was. My brother. Thomas. "Hey, Ruth," he said with a soft smile. "I was just passing through town. Thought I'd drop in." Thomas lived 3 states away. He didn't drop in. Not since the funeral. Not since Cliff passed, and the family stopped gathering for holidays like they used to. My throat tightened, but I smiled. "You always did show up when things got noisy." He chuckled and stepped inside, eyes scanning the familiar hallway. Smells like rosemary and mutiny, he said, grinning. Accurate, I replied. We sat in the living room. I offered him tea. He asked for bourbon. We compromised on strong coffee. Then he looked at me, really looked, and asked the question no one else had thought to. Are you okay? I nearly cried. Not because I wasn't okay, but because someone finally remembered to ask. I am, I said, nodding slowly. More than I've been in years. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I never told you this, he said, but Cliff left something with me years ago. Said to only give it to you when it looked like you'd forgotten how much of this life you built yourself. I blinked. What? He held it out. It's time. My hand shook a little as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Cliff's handwriting. That soft slope I could recognize with my eyes closed. My Ruth. If you're reading this, it means you've finally hit the wall. The wall where kindness meets exhaustion. And I want you to know something. I saw it. I saw how much you gave. How much you tucked away, bent backwards, smiled when no one else did. This home, this family, it doesn't run without you. It never did. If they forget, let me remind you. You are not the wallpaper in this story. You are the whole damn house. Love always.
Cliff.
I stared at it for a long time. A wave of warmth and grief washed over me in equal parts.
Thomas reached for my hand.
I think he knew, he said. Long before any of us did. He knew they'd stop seeing you. I wiped my eyes. But he still saw me. Thomas nodded. He always did. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I stood, walked to the drawer, and pulled out a thick file. Do you want to know what I've been doing? I asked. He grinned. Does it involve making Bree cry? Because yes. I laughed. A real, full laugh that cracked through the months of held tension. I handed him the file. He flipped through it slowly, eyes widening. You moved everything? Every penny, I said. Secured, reviewed, restructured. And not one of them knows the full extent. Thomas looked at me like I'd grown wings. Ruth, they're not ready for you. I'm not here to prepare them, I said. I'm here to rebuild me. He closed the folder and set it on the coffee table. Then let's talk about next steps. We spent the afternoon sketching out a plan. Not a vengeance plot, not some dramatic showdown. Just a timeline. A countdown to freedom. You need a clean break, Thomas said. And you need it to look boring on paper. I raised an eyebrow. He smirked. Trust me, the best revenge stories don't end with shouting matches. They end with relocation paperwork and the sound of tires on gravel. I nodded slowly. He was right. I wasn't going to rage. I was going to vanish. We made 3 copies of the new property protections, scanned the trust modifications, and sealed everything in an envelope marked, to be opened only if they challenge me. Thomas stood before leaving.
One more thing, he said.
Don't let them make you second-guess yourself. I smiled. I stopped second-guessing when Bree called me the maid. And they laughed, he added. That was the scar I no longer needed to hide. He hugged me, tight and warm, and left without another word. When the door shut behind him, I stood in the foyer and looked around. The house felt different. Not lighter, just more honest. Like it had finally admitted it was tired too. That night, I updated my journal. What they think I'll do.
Cry.
Forgive.
Wait.
What I'm actually doing. Packing. Selling. Leaving. And beside it, I wrote one final sentence in all caps. I am a house. It began with a lemon. Bree tossed it on the counter and said, You should make that lemon tart again. I told Vanessa and the yoga girls you'd bring one for brunch this weekend.
She didn't ask.
She assigned. As if my hands existed solely to serve her gatherings. I picked up the lemon, rolled it slowly between my palms, and smiled. I won't be here this weekend, I said, voice calm, almost casual. She blinked. What? I'm going on a trip. A pause. To where? Ahead. That threw her. I could see her bracing for impact, but she didn't know where the blow would come from. The moment I stopped reacting the way they expected, they lost their footing. My silence had always been their leash. Now it was their blindfold. Walter didn't mention a trip. I set the lemon down gently, like it was the last offering I'd ever make. I didn't mention it to Walter. I left the room, but the tension followed me like perfume. Behind me, I could hear her voice rising, panic fluttering beneath the surface like a bird in a cage. She was losing control of her favorite puppet, and the strings were fraying fast. That afternoon, Jeremy knocked on my bedroom door. This time, he didn't barge in.
Progress.
"Can we talk?" he asked softly. I opened the door and stepped aside. He didn't sit. He just hovered by the dresser like a child confessing to a broken lamp. "I read the letter," he said. "From Cliff." My heart lurched. "Thomas dropped it off earlier," he continued. Said he thought I should read it. I folded my arms. And Jeremy stared at the floor. "He loved you. So much more than we ever appreciated. And I guess I didn't realize what we'd done to you." "Not really." I stayed silent. Let him say the words. "I thought you liked being the one who held everything together. I thought it made you feel needed." "It did," I said, "until it made me feel used." Jeremy winced. "I'm sorry, Mom." I nodded. "That's a start." He looked up. "Is it too late?" I gave him the smallest of smiles. "For dessert?"
No.
"For decency?" "We'll see." He nodded and left without asking for anything. That was the first time in years he came to me without expectation in his voice. Maybe there was hope for him. But Bree wasn't surrendering. That evening, I found her in my study, with my old recipe binder in her lap, flipping through pages like she had every right to it. "What are you looking for?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Just thought I'd scan some of these before you leave." "That's private." She laughed. "They're recipes, Ruth, not bank statements." "They're mine," I said. "Pages written in my hand, during my time, for my family." "You're not family. You're a lesson." She snapped the binder shut. "Is this your little power trip now? Reclaim the kitchen? Change the Wi-Fi? What's next? Locking us out?" I didn't answer, because that's exactly what I planned to do. The next day, I scheduled everything. Movers, storage units, legal transfers, a locksmith. Peter's office faxed over the final housing clause updates. Everything was timed down to the hour. Saturday morning, while they were out, Bree at yoga, Jeremy and Walter at the hardware store, I packed. Not everything, just what mattered. The photo albums, Cliff's letters, my journals, the baking tins my grandmother left me, the pearls Bree never knew I kept for myself, the real ones, not the costume set she flaunted on Instagram. I left the rest. Let them keep the furniture they never thanked me for. Let them argue over whose name belonged on bills they never paid. By 3 p.m., the locks had been changed. By 4 o'clock, I was gone. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe one. I left the key in a sealed envelope with Peter's business card and one simple sentence. "You can't sell what you never owned." I took the train to a small town outside of Charleston. Dolores had already set up the apartment. Bright windows, soft pillows, a small porch with flower boxes waiting for seedlings. She greeted me with a tight hug and a bottle of wine. "Did it go smooth?" she asked. "Silky," I said, setting down my bag. We clinked glasses and sat on the porch, watching the breeze sway through the trees. "Think they'll come looking?" she asked. "They'll scream first," I replied. "Then they'll scramble. Then they'll spin their stories. And then," I smiled, "they'll sit in the silence." The first 3 days were quiet. Not suspicious quiet. Sacred quiet. I woke up to birdsong instead of Bree's blender. I brewed coffee, without someone asking where the oat milk was. I showered without anyone knocking on the door to ask where the clean towels were, despite never once washing them. It was a quiet I hadn't realized I'd been missing until it became my daily hymn. On the 4th morning, I walked into town. A little coastal market, white awnings flapping in the breeze, smiling strangers selling tomatoes with dirt still on them. It smelled like sea air and second chances. At the flower stall, I bought marigolds. For no reason at all. Dolores met me on the boardwalk for lunch. She brought sandwiches, and a look in her eye I knew too well. "They're unraveling," she said, mouth full of turkey on rye. I stirred my iced tea. "How bad?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a forwarded email from Peter. Subject: urgent. Ruth has left, call me. Sender: jeremywalker@email.com. Date: yesterday. Peter: we just got home. The locks are changed. Everything is gone. No one will tell us where she went. Bree's calling it elder abuse. I'm just asking for help. We don't understand. We thought she was fine. We thought she was happy. Please call us. I read it twice. Then again. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to absorb the full weight of that we thought. That's always what they say, isn't it? When they realize their caretaker has vanished. We thought she was okay. We thought she didn't mind. We thought she'd never leave. What did Peter say back? I asked. Dolores smirked. Only that you were of sound mind, legally protected, and unavailable. I smiled into my straw. Good. She reached into her tote and handed me another envelope. What's this? Transcripts, she said. Peter recorded their in-office meltdown. Legal reasons. But also, he figured you might want to know. I opened it slowly. Inside were 3 typed pages. The highlights were brutal. Bree had stormed into Peter's office demanding access to the house. Jeremy had tried to play the concerned son card, asking if I'd been coerced. Walter had threatened a lawsuit until Peter quietly slid a copy of the notarized house deed across the table. It's all here, Peter had said. You just assumed she wouldn't use it. I paused on one line that made my heart go still. Bree, but this isn't fair. She didn't warn us. She didn't even explain.
Peter, she did.
You just didn't listen when she used her silence as a sentence. I sat back in my chair, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Dolores was watching me. You okay? I nodded slowly. For the first time, their confusion doesn't feel like my responsibility. She raised her plastic cup.
To that.
We toasted right there on the boardwalk, sun on our skin, the waves applauding our peace. That evening, I opened my journal. A new section. Reactions to my disappearance. Bree. Outrage masked as concern. Jeremy. Regret wrapped in ignorance. Walter. Silence. Still pretending this isn't permanent. But what struck me most wasn't their panic. It was the absence of love in their confusion. They weren't devastated that I was gone. They were devastated they no longer had access to me. There's a difference. And I was finally old enough, clear enough, to name it. They missed what I did, not who I was. I closed the journal and sat by the window, marigolds in a mason jar beside me, Cliff's photo beside it, the soft buzz of the ocean drifting through the screen. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I felt released. That night, I received an email, not from any of them, from the Scholarship Foundation. Subject: confirmation of new fund name and letter of gratitude. Dear Mrs. Ruth Walker, we're honored to confirm your donation has been transferred to our Women Over 60 Empowerment Scholarship. Your requested naming, the Margaret and Cliff Legacy Grant. We've attached a letter from the first recipient, a single grandmother of 2 returning to college for a nursing degree. She writes, I thought I was too late to start over. Your gift showed me I'm not. Thank you. I read it twice. Then I cried. Not the sad kind. The kind that tastes like freedom. Because that money, it had finally gone somewhere it could grow. Somewhere it would bloom. Somewhere I'd never be called a maid. I closed the laptop and whispered to the quiet. Cliff, I finally found someone who deserved the help. Outside, the wind rustled the marigolds. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be seen. I was. Not by them, but by me. It came on a Tuesday. The air was sweet with magnolia, and I had just returned from the garden center, dirt still under my nails, a new pair of gloves tucked in my tote. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and clean cotton. Dolores had left a pie cooling and a note beside it. Went to book club. The one with wine. Not the one where people pretend to read. Back soon.
D.
I smiled. Then came the knock. Not like Thomas's knock, slow, respectful. This one was sharp, insistent. The kind of knock that assumes ownership of your time. I didn't answer it right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I already knew who it was. I moved to the window and pulled the sheer curtain just an inch aside.
Bree.
Of course. Wearing sunglasses too large for her face and a white wrap dress that screamed, I didn't come here to apologize. I came here to perform. She was holding her phone in one hand like a weapon and tapping her foot like she had better places to be. I stood still, waited. The knocking continued. Then a pause. Then a voice. Ruth, I know you're in there. So sure of herself. So used to being heard. Peter told us everything. You can't just vanish like this. It's not normal. I leaned against the wall, arms folded, the soft hum of the fan whispering beside me. Jeremy is worried sick, she continued. Walter hasn't left the house in days. Kyle's been asking why you disappeared.
Kyle.
The boy who once laughed as I drowned, who mimicked me flailing in the lake while everyone else sipped rose and giggled. Let him wonder. Let him sit with the silence. Bree's voice cracked slightly. Look, maybe the joke was too far, but you could have just told us. You didn't have to do all this. You didn't have to punish us. Punish. There it was. The assumption that my peace was a form of violence. That my boundaries were an attack. That my leaving was a betrayal. But what about the betrayal of being erased? Of being laughed at? Of being served mockery and asked to say, thank you? I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Eventually, she sighed, loud and performative, and slid something under the door. I brought you something. Just read it. Then silence. Moments later, I heard her heels retreating, each step slower than the last, like she expected me to fling the door open and call after her. I didn't. I waited until the hallway was empty. Then, and only then, I opened the door. The envelope sat on the floor, thick and too pink. Inside, a folded card. Front, forgive and forget. Inside, a long paragraph in perfect cursive. Dear Ruth, I know things got heated. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. That was never the intention. You've always been part of our family, and we assumed you'd always be there. Jeremy is devastated. Walter doesn't know how to talk to you. I'm trying to fix this. Please reach out when you're ready to come back. With love, Bree. It wasn't an apology.
It was a PR campaign.
No, I was wrong. No, I'm sorry I said what I said. No, you deserved better. Just, sorry if. Just, assumed. Just, come back. I folded the card and slipped it into the fireplace. Watched the corners curl. Not out of spite, out of closure. I texted Peter that night. Ruth, she found me. Peter, did you respond? Ruth, no. Peter, good. That's not a door. That's bait. Dolores came back around sunset. Found me on the porch with a slice of pie and a glass of wine. She sat beside me quietly, then said, they reached out. I nodded. Let me guess. Not to say they're sorry, just that they're surprised. I handed her the now burned remains of the card. She raised an eyebrow.
Well,
that's a new kind of hallmark. I took a deep breath and looked at the horizon. The sea shimmered like a mirror, and for a moment, I could see a younger version of myself, apron tied, hair pinned back, hands full of lists and casseroles, looking back at me. She didn't look angry. She looked relieved. I think I finally understand, I said. Understand what? Dolores asked. That they don't miss me, I said. They miss the version of me who didn't know she had options. Dolores clinked her glass against mine. To options, she said. To exits, I replied. We sat in that earned silence for a long time. And for the first time since I walked out of that house, I didn't feel like I had escaped. I felt like I had arrived. It started with a voice I hadn't heard in years. Grandma? I turned. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the garden path, holding his hands behind his back like he was waiting to be scolded or forgiven.
Kyle.
Taller, leaner, older, but still wearing that same crooked smirk he wore the day he shoved me into the lake. Only now it looked hollow. "I got your address from Peter," he said. He said he wasn't supposed to give it to me, but I told him I needed to say something in person. I didn't speak. Not yet. Because part of me still didn't believe he was real. Not here, not in my garden, not after the cruelty, the silence, the mockery. He took a hesitant step forward. "I drove through the night," he said. "Didn't tell anyone." I raised an eyebrow. "Not even Bree?" He laughed softly. "Especially not Bree." I didn't offer him a chair. He didn't ask for one. "I didn't come here to explain," he said. "I know I can't." My silence held the weight of everything I could say. He fidgeted with the hem of his sweatshirt. "You were always the safe one, the place to land. And I never realized that meant you were also the easiest to ignore." I looked down at my hands, fingers calloused from decades of giving. "They taught me that love was a transaction," he continued. "Do good, get rewarded. Make a joke, get attention. And I started treating you like background noise." I met his eyes. "You pushed me into a lake." He flinched. "I know," he said, voice cracking. And I laughed. He took a deep breath, his face crumpling. "I laughed because I thought it was funny to treat you like nothing. Because that's how everyone else treated you. And I wanted to belong." The wind stirred the garden around us. Leaves rustled. A cardinal chirped once. Then silence again. I saw it then. The boy who used to leave wildflowers on my pillow, who cried when I scraped my knee in the garden, who once asked if angels got tired. Now, standing in front of me, asking if forgiveness had a back door. "I've been volunteering," he said, almost defensively, "at a retirement home. I thought maybe if I spent time with people who feel forgotten, I'd understand what I did." Did it help? He swallowed.
No.
It just made it worse, because every time one of them smiled at me, I saw your face. I finally spoke.
You didn't just mock me, Kyle. You erased me.
In front of everyone. And you made being me a joke. Tears welled in his eyes. "I know. I'll never be able to undo that." "No," I said. "You won't." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I wrote something. For school. A personal essay. I didn't know who else to share it with. I hesitated, then took it. The title read, "The Woman Who Was the House." I read it quietly. It wasn't perfect,
But it was honest.
about how I raised him, how I carried the weight no one else saw, how he mistook silence for weakness and loyalty for obligation, and how he'd only just now learned that the people who seem the strongest are often the most bruised. He looked down at his shoes as I read, like a child waiting for judgment. When I finished, I folded it slowly and set it on the garden table. "Why now?" I asked. He looked up. "Because I realized I'd rather be rejected for showing up too late than hate myself for never showing up at all." I closed my eyes for a moment. Let that land. Let the grief move through me like wind. And then I stood, walked to the flower bed, bent down and picked a marigold, turned to him and held it out. Not a hug, not absolution, but something. He took it like it was gold. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I know," he replied, "and I'm not reopening the fund." "I don't deserve it," he said. I studied his face. Finally, he looked like Cliff. Not in features, in remorse, in effort. "You don't get my money," I said. "But maybe," I added, "you still get a mirror." He nodded. "I'll keep holding it up." And with that, he walked back down the garden path, slowly, marigold in hand, essay folded under his arm. Not redeemed, but aware. I sat back down, heart heavier and lighter all at once. That evening, I wrote in my journal. Today, Kyle returned. Not as a boy, not as a man, as a beginning. I didn't forgive him to make him feel better. I forgave him so I could breathe easier. Because peace is not an inheritance. It's a legacy you build when no one is watching. The morning after Kyle left, I woke earlier than usual. The sky was still gray, the world not yet awake. I sat on the porch wrapped in Cliff's flannel, a blanket over my knees, and a quiet that didn't ache anymore. It had been 84 days since I left the house they thought I'd die in. 84 days since I chose not to disappear quietly, but deliberately. They still hadn't found me in the way they hoped. No address forwarded. No phone calls answered. Only Peter's clinical emails bouncing back with phrases like legally unavailable and estate fully reassigned. The power of no had never felt so complete. Dolores shuffled out later that morning, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to me, then stared at the horizon. "Feels like something's done," she said. I nodded. "Because it is." We didn't speak for a while after that. We didn't need to. Instead, I went inside and pulled out the envelope, the one I'd been sealing in pieces over the last few weeks. It was time. Inside was a letter to Jeremy, a copy of the foundation confirmation, a photo of Cliff holding Kyle as a baby, and a handwritten note with only 4 words. "Legacy is not possession." I gave it to Dolores. "Mail it. If they still need answers, this is all they get." She nodded solemnly, holding it like a will, like a final chapter. I returned to the garden and spent the next few hours transplanting marigolds into new pots, gifts for the neighbors. They'd brought me casserole, conversation, peace. They deserved something living in return. By noon, I started packing, not to leave, just to clear. I donated the scarves no one ever complimented, the holiday plates only I cleaned. I folded the sweaters they always said were too much and put them in a bag labeled "not anymore." Every act of letting go became lighter. At 3 p.m., I took my final walk to the ocean, Cliff's photo in my pocket. I sat on the edge of the dock, toes grazing the water, and I said goodbye. Not to Cliff. He never left me. I said goodbye to the woman I had to be, the one who bit her tongue, baked for birthdays she wasn't invited to, waited at windows that never opened. I whispered to the wind, "Thank you for keeping me alive, but I don't need you anymore." And I swear, somewhere between the waves and the sun, I felt something loosen in my chest, like my ribs opened wide enough to hold peace again. That night, I hosted dinner for the first time in years, not for people who took, but for people who gave without keeping score. The retired teacher next door, the widower from 2B who played piano every morning, Dolores, of course, who brought dessert and zero subtlety. The laughter was soft, easy. No performance. No one expected me to clean. When the last guest left, I stood at the sink, hands in warm water, and realized something that took me a lifetime to learn. I wasn't bitter. I was clear. The difference is everything. I walked into my room, pulled out my journal, and opened to the very last page. I wrote, "They wanted an ending. I chose a new story. They'll say I ran, but I simply walked into a place where I wasn't asked to prove I mattered. I was never the maid. I was the foundation, and I finally rebuilt. For me." Then I turned out the light and slept, not like someone waiting to be remembered, but like someone who finally remembered herself.